So we're doubling down. We're doing more. We're going to do more, both domestic and international. We're going to educate more students in El Salvador in the year after legal tender was removed than in the year before it was removed, right? We're going to teach more people in 2025 than we did in 2024. We're going to have more materials this year. We're going to have more meetups.
Welcome back to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez, and today I am overjoyed to be joined by my friend, John Dennehy, who is the founder of Mi Primer Bitcoin, in English known as My First Bitcoin, which is a nonprofit organization which provides a Bitcoin education curriculum to school children in El Salvador. John, thank you for coming on the show. How are you?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I am doing very well this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. John, the last time I saw you was, I want to say, like a month ago, maybe, or like 3 weeks ago, in El Salvador for the Plan B Forum.
Yeah.
And it was kind of remarkable because that happened like at the very same time that the legal tender law in El Salvador was changed from legal tender to like an opt-in kind of like arrangement for accepting Bitcoin payments in El Salvador. There was a lot of controversy surrounding that announcement, and it seems like there's still a bit of controversy between the Bitcoin community and the government of El Salvador in terms of the lack of clear communication around the changes being made to the law, the amount of like foreign will that's being imposed on El Salvador as a sovereign nation under the conditions of the IMF loan, and many other factors. You've been quite vocal about it, unlike many other people that are in El Salvador that have kind of chosen to avoid the controversy. So I wanted to have you on the show to kind of get your opinion on what's been going on the ground, what's actually changed, what people can expect under the new legal conditions, and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah. What can you share with us?
Yeah. I think that's a pretty accurate rundown of events. I might replace, or maybe rather than replace, add to controversial. I'll add confusion to that. There's been in the past few weeks. So I guess it's been I think it's been about 5 weeks now, actually. In those 5 weeks, there's been a lot of confusion about what is happening, what will happen, and whether that's a good thing or not. What I am most concerned about, or let me flip it. What I am least concerned about is the last one, whether it's a good thing or not. Like I'm not stating an opinion on whether the government of El Salvador should have law A or law B, policy A, policy B. I mean, that's a whole separate thing. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to call attention to, because it is something that is a red flag for myself, is the intentional misleading or unclear communication, right? This is a choice that has been made. This is not an accident, like, oops, we forgot to explain things well. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a choice that has been made. And that's a red flag for me, right? As someone who got into Bitcoin in the first place because it seemed a good space for people who thought critically about the world, oppositional thinking, and also did not blindly trust the state, did not blindly trust governments, did not blindly trust large institutions, right? That questioned it. And I believe that's what I am trying to do. I'm trying to question what is actually happening with these, whether it's the IMF, the local government here, like what's actually going on, because it seems like it's intentional that they don't want that to be clear, and that's a red flag.
Yeah, I would say so too, because they released like a document, and then the IMF also released a document, but I saw the longer one, which was the one released by the Salvadorian government, which kind of explained like the conditions of the loan a little bit. And then like the day after they did that, like they bought more Bitcoin, and President Bukele like sent a tweet saying like it's not going to stop, like they think it's going to stop and this and that. And to me that was very, very confusing, because if I remember correctly, in the document that they released, they had like a deadline, you know, like a timeline that they were going to implement these changes. So like as far as I know, like these purchases are not under that deadline. So like they're still able to happen without violating the conditions of the loan. Whereas like in 2 or 3 months, like when these deadlines go into effect, like I don't know if we're going to see more purchases by the government.
Yeah, yeah, and it's probably before getting into that, it might be worth giving like a super brief overview of the situation.
Yeah, please do, please do.
So El Salvador in 2021, they became the first nation in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. They had a Bitcoin law, which was there were a series of changes made in this Bitcoin law, but the headline, right, the real notable one was that it made Bitcoin legal tender. And that was massive news. Like I remember I saw it, they announced it at the Bitcoin conference in Miami in June. So Jack Mallers announced it with kind of a video message from President Bukele. There was a media tour that President Bukele went on afterwards. He did Twitter Spaces, he did podcasts. It was
I
very
remember that Bitcoin City presentation he did where he was like in the all white suit.
yeah. So there was like a huge splash, right? And you know, like my reaction to this maybe is a bit personal, and that's usually a bad thing, right? We should, as much as possible, try to remove emotions from these things. But like it got me, right? I was one of those people who was like, holy shit, like this is a big deal. And so
How soon did you move down there? Like after the law went into effect?
I moved down there before the law went into effect. I moved
Oh,
down
wow.
there.
Okay.
So there's a
Like as
90
soon as they announced it, basically.
this will come up later. The way that the legal system works in El Salvador is once a law is passed, it takes 90 days to go into effect, right? So the
Okay.
law was passed in June of 2021, and it went into effect in September. So I moved here in August of 2021.
Okay.
And yeah, it was just such a huge signal for me, and I think a lot of other people, that um, Bitcoin was entering a new arena, basically.
Mhm.
Uh, and now what happened recently is, and another attractive thing in that moment of time, was the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, is a wonderful public speaker, and he railed very eloquently against this globalist order, right? Against institutions such as USAID and the IMF. He was very outspoken, very vocal, very eloquent. And I basically agreed with it all, right? Like I've been an anti-IMF activist longer than I've been a Bitcoiner, right? That's actually how I got into Bitcoin. Was like the IMF is the problem. So what's the
Mhm.
solution? And then there's Bitcoin. Um, so that changed, right? The IMF had early on been like, you know, no Bitcoin law, no legal tender. This is a bad idea. You guys need to not do this in the time since it was passed to when it was enacted. And then after it was enacted in 2021, 2022, the IMF was still, you know, publicly saying that they disagreed with this and that El Salvador should not have Bitcoin as legal tender. Um,
Around
and
that time, I remember statements that were being made by like the ambassador. I think it was Malena Mayorga that may have said it, and then also Bukele himself may have said it. But there was like around the time that the Bitcoin law was passed, they were saying that the reason they were passing the Bitcoin law was because they were going to use Bitcoin as a way to get out from under, basically like they were going to use it to get out from under the thumb of the IMF that the IMF does, I guess, through these loan programs.
right. So fast forward until late 2024, and in December, so a couple of days before Christmas, then IMF released a staff level agreement, which is effectively like a draft. It's a draft agreement for a loan, and the things really started to move on January 29th, right? Like about a month after this was released, because that is when the El Salvadorian government, so the parliament, the assembly here, they passed a bill that rescinded Bitcoin as legal tender and made a number of amendments to the Bitcoin law that was passed in 2021, including rescinding Bitcoin as legal tender. And that was massive, right? And again, like I want to draw a contrast between what happened in 2021 and what happened in 2025. In 2021, there was a media tour, right? This was announced at the world's largest Bitcoin conference in front of tens of thousands of people. And then there was a media tour to highlight it. This was sent, I believe it wasn't on the legislative agenda for the day. It was sent by the president to the assembly and without discussion was voted on along party lines. So Nuevas Ideas, which is the president's political party here, they control, I think, 57 of 60 assembly seats. So there were 2 votes against and 55 for, and I guess there were 3 people absent. But it was basically along like the president's party just voted for it, and that was it. There was no announcement about it. There was no media tour. In fact, quite the opposite. So it seems like they tried to do it without anybody noticing.
Like sneak it through.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely did not draw any attention to it. Which, again, in contrast to the passage of the law in 2021, they were just like, they had big, big arrows pointed at it, right? So that was kind of the first red flag for me. Like when a large, centralized, powerful institution doesn't want you to look at something, it's probably something you should look at. So yeah, that was kind of the first step, and things heated up then. And that was, I think there was a lot of disbelief about it. I was one of the people who from day one was like, this is a big deal. Bitcoin's no longer legal tender. The IMF now has, this draft agreement from December, like, okay, this is real. Like, this is really happening, because this is one of the preconditions. So the draft agreement lays out some preconditions that El Salvador would have to meet in order to be eligible for this loan. So it's like, oh, this isn't just talks. Like they're actually following through on this. And this is one, Bitcoin's no longer legal tender. 2, this was the other point that there was so much confusion about. Many people thought that El Salvador was going to take the loan and just buy Bitcoin with it, which is like such a ridiculous thought, right? Like it's not how the IMF is not evil because they are bad at their job, right? And their job is not to loan money. They're not in the business of loaning money. They're in the business of exerting control over nations. Money is just a means to an end for them, right? They wait for nations to basically be desperate where they have no other options. And then they have all the leverage, right? And they could ask for whatever they want. They give them effectively a no interest loan, which is like wild all by itself and shows you that they don't actually care about making money. They give you a loan when nobody else will give you a loan. They say nice things about you, which improves your credit rating and opens up new pools of money for you to get loans from other organizations and sovereign wealth funds, all that stuff. And they attach a lot of restrictions. It's like, we'll give you this, but we need a pound of flesh, right? And that pound of flesh is different for each nation. For El Salvador, it wasn't just Bitcoin, though Bitcoin was a pretty big part of the pound of flesh that they requested and seemingly are getting from El Salvador. But sorry if I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but the IMF it's important, the context of why the IMF is bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the IMF being bad is necessary to understand why this loan is bad for El Salvador. The IMF makes sure that there are no outlier nations, right? It brings nations into the center, into whatever the dominant status quo is. The IMF's job is to enforce that. And El Salvador was a bit of a rebel, right? They were kind of, pushing the envelope with Bitcoin. They were kind of defying this global order by doing so. And they're not anymore, right? So it's a big deal, not just that they rescinded Bitcoin as legal tender. It's a big deal because the IMF, so the loan is structured over a 40-month period. So we'll go until just about 2029, assuming there are no pauses or delays, which sometimes there are, and it could extend it. Well, that is in effect, the IMF has a seat at the table for everything to do with Bitcoin policy in El Salvador, right? Everything to do with the terms of the agreement, but because Bitcoin policy is such a big part of the terms of the agreement, effectively, they have a seat at the table for every discussion about Bitcoin policy in El Salvador for the next years.
What about the digital asset law? Because I know like they passed the Bitcoin law first, but then there was another law that they passed shortly after. It was like maybe 6 months to 8 months later. That was a digital assets law that allowed for like other tokens aside from Bitcoin to be regulated as well. Are they messing with these other like tokens or like digital currencies that may fall under the digital assets law as well? Or is it just Bitcoin that they're singling out?
It's just Bitcoin.
Okay.
So what and the reason why they're not singling out, or not singling out, but including other assets is because the loan terms are targeted at, effectively, it's at public spending, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, well, I guess there is some regulation in there, right? Because legal tender is regulation, but you could argue that that's still public spending because the way that it was structured previous was El Salvador, the government of El Salvador could not only could they, but they had to accept Bitcoin for services, right? Like when you come in and you pay your airport tax.
Yeah, every Bitcoiner posts about that when they get to El Salvador for the first time.
Yeah. So I paid my residency with Bitcoin, right? Like for government services, and I think that the plan was for taxes too. I don't know if they ever got around to that. There were a lot of things that were still in motion. But so, legal tender necessitates the government to accept that currency, right? So what the IMF conditions were, broadly speaking, is that the government can't be involved with Bitcoin. So it's not targeting regulation, it's targeting public exposure to Bitcoin, but sometimes they overlap, right? If the regulation is that we have to accept Bitcoin for payment for services or taxes, whatever it is, I think the IMF, maybe their argument is that even though we're not really targeting regulation, we don't want the government to touch Bitcoin, so you need to change this regulation. So, but they didn't change the digital assets law. That wasn't one of the targets of the IMF bill. So, continuing the narrative of what happened after. So January 29th, they passed this law which rescinds some of the key properties of the Bitcoin law that was passed in 2021. And that, again, same as 2021, it takes 90 days to go into effect. So that would be April 30th. That's when these changes actually go into effect. There's also confusion about that. So the 2021 law, unamended, still stands today, March 11th, right? Wait until April 30th, and that won't be the case anymore. But there's confusion about that because there weren't, some people are like, look, the store still accepts Bitcoin, so it's just FUD that they rescinded this. And it's like, well, that's not how it works here. But, and again, that wasn't explained, right? That's actually, a lot of this is fairly easily explained. A lot of the confusion is fairly easily explained if you want to, right? On both ends, if you want to explain it, and two, if you want to accept the truth that is not what you hoped it to be. So both on the given and the receiving end. So things got really interesting when the IMF. So it was IMF that released a very long document. It was a 111-page document about 2 weeks ago now, but it included a lot of source material and a lot of context for the agreement, which included letters from the Salvadorian government to the IMF about how they plan to comply with the preconditions to get the loan. And so this is from the Salvadorian government, that they will no longer accumulate Bitcoin, that they won't buy Bitcoin, that they won't even mine Bitcoin anymore. This is, again, literally from the Salvadorian government to the IMF, right?
In their own words.
Yeah. And then, that started to get picked up quite a bit, a lot more than the January 29th bill. Like, this got picked up quite a bit by the Bitcoin community. And I think it was one day later then that Bukele tweeted, well, one, the public Bitcoin address had continued to receive Bitcoin, although since the end of January, it had been sporadic. They've been buying 1 Bitcoin a day since 2022, and it was literally 1 Bitcoin a day, right? There was no pause, never more, never less. Like, I'm pretty sure it's just an automatic buy, right? Like, it's not like a manual thing that they're doing every day. And around the time that they passed that law, January 29th, is when it started to become erratic, where days would be missed, but other days they would like double down or even buy like 5 Bitcoin or whatever. So there was some change there where it's no longer seemingly automatic. I don't know why. Something changed there. And then because of this documentation by the IMF, then people were like, oh, wow, so they can't buy Bitcoin. They can't even mine Bitcoin. And then, they added another Bitcoin to that wallet that day, and Bukele tweeted, like, this isn't going to stop. This won't stop. Bitcoiners have abandoned us. I don't know. I should probably bring up the actual tweet to read it. I don't misquote him, but it was a very interesting tweet to come from a head of state. It was like a passive aggressive. I don't know. It seemed like something a teenager would write. Head of state would write. Like, it felt like very emotional from that side, which, again, we should probably try to remove emotions as much as possible with these things, especially if you're a head of state. So it doesn't. What the president is saying does not agree with what his own government is saying. Like, literally what their own words, the IMF, were. They do not agree with each other. And that is very curious and actually raises more questions than it answers. It's like, is El Salvador planning to defy the conditions of this loan? And the answer is no, right? Just like super quick context about how IMF loans work. One, they would stop payments, right? It's 40 payments, so they would stop payments. They would, but more importantly, they would tell everyone why they stopped payments. And what they would say if they defied the loan, they would say El Salvador engaged in effectively a bait and switch. They said that they were going to do A. We started giving them money, and they said, well, haha, we're going to do B instead. That's not how loans work generally, but especially with the IMF. They would know that they weren't following the conditions. They would stop payment, but more than them stopping payment, they would tell everyone like El Salvador can't be trusted, right?
And they would be like cut off from the rest of the global financial system, basically.
Yes, like completely cut off. Think about it though. Think about, so a large part of how debt is created is actually from individuals like buying bonds. Would you buy, like a loan is a promise to repay, and there's conditions, whether it's like a date or like actions that need to be taken or whatever, but would you lend money to a country after they did that? After they did that and like gave the like, yeah, we'll take your loan, haha, now we're gonna defy all the conditions. They wouldn't. Like nobody would lend to that country. You wouldn't enter into a loan agreement knowing that you were immediately going to defy it. Like that's
it would be suicidal financially for the nation state.
You only enter into this agreement in the first place, and it's in the 111-page documentation. It shows the increasing debt of El Salvador over the past few years. El Salvador didn't take a loan from the IMF because they had a choice. They took a loan from the IMF because they're having difficulty finding lenders, right?
Now, see, I have several questions around that aspect of it. Like, I remember like there was a lot of like when the Bitcoin law first went into effect, Bukele was taking a lot of hits in the media because they were calling him crazy and a dictator and this and that because he was buying Bitcoin. And then they said that El Salvador was like at high risk to default on its loans and they had like a bad credit rating. Then Bukele came out and announced that they were not going to default on their loans and that they were going to pay it back, and they paid it back. And like then like people were surprised by that and were like, wow, like El Salvador is like really turning it around economically. And then their bonds started going up in value, and like they were outperforming like a bunch of other like countries in the region. And I thought they had like turned it around financially, first of all. And then second of all, they had announced for like almost since the inception of the Bitcoin law that they were going to use this volcano bond to or volcano token to raise capital to pay off like their sovereign debt. Why were like, I guess the public told that they were turning it around financially? And then second, why did they never like pursue that option to not take on this debt from the IMF, but rather to pay it off through their volcano bond?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first.
Okay.
And about the volcano bonds, I don't know. I don't know what happened with the volcano bonds. I was excited about that too. I don't know why that never came to fruition. And it's one of those things that it's like, now you look back at things a little bit different. And it's like, wait a second, that also just died off without explanation. Like nobody, I mean, some people know, but it's not public knowledge why something that people were super excited about and that was announced to much fanfare just kind of like went away. And there's like a couple of things like that now it's like, oh, is this a pattern? But the only true answer from my perspective is I don't know what happened in the volcano bonds. So then the question of, you know, El Salvador seemingly was turning things around. They were buying back debt. So what happened there? It was just really good marketing. And I say this as someone who got caught up in it too. Like I assumed, I didn't do my research then. I believed that to be accurate of everything that was happening. But what I now realize is that was just good marketing, because what actually happened, so El Salvador bought back some of their debt that was going to expire soon. Like I don't know the years offhand, but like the 2026 or the 2028 debt. And they bought that off, and that was like, and they heavily promoted that they were buying off this debt as like, see, we showed them. What happened was they took out new loans at higher interest, sometimes at higher interest rates, to pay off that debt. You know, loans that are due in like say 2050 or something like that. So they took out new loans to pay off the debt that was coming due, and they made a big deal that they were paying off the debt that was coming due, and let people believe that it was because they turned things around, not because they just created more debt somewhere else. So the debt has grown since 2019, has grown by more than 50% in El Salvador, which is pretty massive. But to give a point of comparison, it's roughly equal to how fast the debt has grown in the United States since 2019. So if you think the debt has been growing quickly in the United States, it's the same in El Salvador. Only, at least to speak personally, I was aware of that with the US. I was misinformed about El Salvador's situation. I thought that they were on a different trajectory. They were on a similar trajectory, in fact.
Okay.
And I think that's actually a lot of what this is I think what Bukele, if I could speculate, what he's going to try to do in the next months and years is he's going to try to comply with the IMF loan conditions and pretend like he's not. Right? He's going to try to walk this tightrope where he's actually compliant. And like, you know, what he tweets is not one of the conditions, right? So he could tweet whatever he wants. They could send, and there's a number of workarounds, right? They could transfer Bitcoin from an existing private wallet that they have, because they have Bitcoin outside of this one public address. So they could drip Bitcoin in. So they're not accumulating new Bitcoin. They're just transferring it between the wallets that they own. But
it creates an illusion that they're non-compliant.
They're actually being compliant in that situation with the IMF terms, but it looks like they're defying them, right? That's just one example. It could be, you know, it could be like a company could donate like a Bitcoin a day, right? Like it could be donations, it could be move in funds that they already control. Like I think they're going to try to be compliant while giving the appearance that they're defiant, which is a really tricky thing to do, but they might pull it off, right? Again, this administration is excellent at marketing. And I have been very surprised how many people blindly trust the government here, like even among Bitcoiners. You know, it's like you want to believe in that. You want to believe in that fantasy that there's like this small country that is, you know, it's the David versus Goliath, right? Like you want that to be true. And if you want something to be true, most people aren't going to try that hard to disprove it.
So like someone like you who's moved there and like totally uprooted your life and like come there to like establish a life under a Bitcoin standard, do you feel like that you have like a sunk cost fallacy a little bit?
Oh yeah. I
mean,
the
Salvadorian Bitcoin experiment. Like what's, I guess, the attitude on the ground among Bitcoiners, and then also these businesses like I mean, Bitfinex, for example, we have Bitfinex Securities there, Bitrefill, Strike. Like, there's all these huge Bitcoin companies that are based in El Salvador now and have headquarters in El Salvador. Like, are they planning on staying the course and continuing their work on the ground, or like, are companies pulling out? Like, what have you seen, like, among Bitcoiners and then also among businesses?
Yeah. So I think I'll start by saying that there's a number of dates about when things become effective. So the law that was passed becomes effective April 30th. The IMF loan, which is now official, like a couple of weeks ago, it became official at the end of February, and they dispersed the first payment. There's a number of enforcement dates on that. Some things have already been complied, and the ones that haven't, end of March is one. I think end of June is another, and the final one is end of December. And it's staggered depending on what the particular condition is when they need to comply with it. So part of it is like it's too early to tell. But I'll try to answer your question as best I can with the time that has elapsed. So for businesses, I haven't seen much movement. You know, the big companies that you mentioned, I don't believe that they are going to change their plans. For whatever reason, I don't anticipate that will change. Smaller businesses, like local businesses here, Salvadorian businesses, some have already begun to change because even among the local population, it's not well known that 90-day delay. So we've seen just from the I probably shouldn't dox this business, but we've seen businesses that have started to add new conditions to accept in Bitcoin. You know, it's all the events that we have are always at businesses that accept Bitcoin. It's like a point of principle, and there have been some that have specifically mentioned the law and that it's no longer legal tender, therefore X. And X usually isn't a good thing. Therefore, like, we're going to pass on the service charge. You know, if they're accepting Bitcoin but immediately converting it, whatever that the third party service charges, like, we're going to pass that on to you, like just things like that. Some larger businesses, such as Super Selectos, which is the big grocery store chain here, like the really dominant grocery store chain, they and like another one, Free Owned, which is a hardware chain, and you know, Walmart. These large chains actually all accept Bitcoin because they have compliance teams, right? So when they passed the law in 2021, that like big chains were like, well, we're going to comply with this. It's the mom and pop ones that were more hit or miss, right?
Yeah, I remember seeing like McDonald's, Starbucks,
Yeah.
Walmart, Super Selectos, like I think maybe even Price Smart. Like,
I mean, all of them. All the
yeah.
So no movement there because they're going to follow the letter of the law. So they won't do anything. They won't announce anything until April 30th at the earliest. But I do anticipate many of those businesses will drop Bitcoin acceptance because they never really wanted it in the first place. And you could tell how they've implemented it has, like, it's something that you implement when you, not because you want to do something, but because somebody's making you. Like, it's, I mean, there's pros and cons, right? If you're going to implement Bitcoin poorly, then maybe you just shouldn't do it at all. But so I anticipate that will change. As far as individuals, there's been a number of people who are thinking about, and a couple who already have left El Salvador, who moved here because of the Bitcoin law, have either already left or are considering leaving, waiting to see how things shake out. That's not everyone, of course. There's many people who are, I don't want to say happy about this, but like see it as a neutral thing, right? Like, legal tender wasn't like that's not important for Bitcoin success anyway. It's going to be bottom up. Like there's some very good counter arguments, and like I said in the beginning, I'm not choosing a side there, right? I'm just calling out the process of how we got here, rather than do I want Bitcoin to be legal tender or not? Does that fit the Bitcoin ethos? Like there's pros and cons, right? So yeah, it's early to tell, but there's some early signs of discontent and change among both businesses and individuals.
Our team was just out there like a couple of weeks before the Plan B conference, and they had discussed the prospect of the loan going through and the law changing with Bitcoiners that were there on the ground. And a lot of the Bitcoiners that the Bitfinex team talked to were actually very positive and were saying things like, oh, it's not going to stop us. We're going to continue using Bitcoin no matter what, and kind of shared that sentiment. So I know like not everybody's like super negative on the changes, but it is, you know, a substantial change. And if I was somebody that had like moved to another country to benefit from like this legal framework that they had implemented and then it changed, I might reconsider.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is, as you mentioned earlier, like the sunk cost fallacy, right? But maybe it's time to transition to like more positive news, right? And we could talk about the cool.
For sure. Well, I guess like what's my first Bitcoin's response going to be to
right?
To the change?
Yeah. So yeah, this is a perfect segue. So I probably seem pretty pessimistic, but I'm actually not, right? I think Bitcoin is an incredible tool that gives the individual sovereignty, and we can only realize that sovereignty through knowledge, including financial literacy. And that's why I'm so passionate about shedding light on this IMF deal, because I consider this sort of advanced financial literacy. You could be happy with the outcome, but you should understand the process. You should understand how this happened, why it happened, who's benefiting from it, who's not, like what is marketing, what is real. That's important. Financial literacy is important. It actually is an empowerment tool. So while I disagree with how the process has unfolded, and I think that there should be more transparency around it, and less marketing, just like tell us what's actually happening. Simultaneously, I remain quite bullish on El Salvador. El Salvador remains a unique place in the world because people are optimistic here. People believe that tomorrow will be better than today, which is actually pretty rare in the world today. And that optimism bleeds out into so many other things, right? Like the best way to predict the future is to create it. And if you think that the future could be better than the present, and you believe that you have a say in that, that's step one of actually creating that better future. And they have that step one here in El Salvador, which is really great to be around. And the government has done, despite me railing on the government and the president thus far, they've done a ton of good stuff here too, right? Like nothing is black and white. There's a lot of gray out there. Just because I don't like one policy, just because I have an opinion about one thing, doesn't mean that, you know, everything's bad, right? It's much safer. It's significantly more safe than when I moved here 3.5 years ago, which is a huge change, really important. There's a lot of good energy here. There's a lot of good people, good spirit, good organizations. And even the government does good stuff sometimes, but not all the time. And we should call it out when they don't do good stuff, right? We shouldn't be there either all terrible or all wonderful, right? we should call things out when we see it, which is kind of my point. But my first Bitcoin, in response to this, similar to what you were saying, that the response that you heard from Bitcoiners, is we're going to double our efforts here, right? So last year we taught about 10,000 in-person students in El Salvador. This year we're going to teach 21,000.
Okay. That's an ambitious increase.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very confident that we're going to do it. Like, Me Premier Bitcoin, and it's probably worth doing a quick summary. So my first Bitcoin is a Bitcoin education nonprofit. It was started here in El Salvador in 2021. Since its founding, we have taught over 40,000 students in El Salvador. We have developed a number of materials that are open source. Sorry, there's a water truck here. This is terrible timing. You need water too. So we've taught over 40,000 students here in El Salvador since founded. No. We've developed a number of open source materials. The most well-known is the Bitcoin Diploma, which I have here. This is a 10-week program. It's financial education for the Bitcoin era. So the first half, roughly, the first 5 weeks, are financial education. What is money? Why is money? And then the second half is Bitcoin. Again, first understand the problem, then you can see the solution. So because everything that we do is open source, we noticed that people were starting to use our materials and methods in other places and reaching out for support. So we kind of leaned into it, and we created 2 years ago this month, actually, it was in March 2023. We created what we call the Independent Bitcoin Educators Node Network, which are Bitcoin educators that agree to a core set of values. The education must be independent, impartial, community-led, Bitcoin-only, quality, and teach empowerment. So if you agree with all 6, then you could apply to the network. The network is now self-governing, so the network itself decides whether you're admitted or not. And at this point, there are more than 60 nodes in more than 30 nations around the world that agree to this core set of values, use these same materials that we've developed here. And we work together. So there might be, the node in Haiti and the node in Dominican Republic. They might share some resources because they're next to each other, which is actually super cool. That's a real example that's actually really happening, which is super cool, because
amazing.
Haiti and Republic,
they're
not super friends with each other. So it's cool that the Bitcoiners on the ground in each country are actually working together there. But that's one of like so many examples of how this network has actually made real. One of our core assumptions when we began it is that we are more than the sum of our parts. That's really coming true now, which is amazing. So anyway, that's the project, my first Bitcoin. And we also, I should probably plug this stuff too. We also host unconferences. So it's effectively a decentralized conference around the theme of Bitcoin education. Our next one, this is something that we do around the world. So the next one that we have is April 10th in Nashville in the United States, over at Bitcoin Park. BitcoinUnconference.com. If you just go to that URL, then you can find out more there.
When was I went to one that was at Cadejo de la Montaña. That was in like 2023, I think, like right ahead of adopting Bitcoin.
Yes, that was the first one. You're an OG.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, that was the very first one. So we typically piggyback on larger existing conferences and do it like the day before, because it's a smaller event. Like we always aim for 150 people. We want to keep it small, like high signal. And yeah, that was, I mean, we do a lot of experimentation. We just throw a lot of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. It was actually, the unconference was somewhat born out of the Node network. We have these monthly general assemblies where we all get together and we share best practices, essentially, like what we're working on, what we need help with, and see how we could help each other. And it's such an inspiring session to sit in a call with people around the world who are like really pushing the envelope in their own communities. Uh, we're like, should we do this in person? And that was part of the inspiration for the first unconference. And we were like, oh, this is super cool. Let's keep doing this. So now we do. Now we've taken it on the road, right? Like we always do it before adopting Bitcoin. Always, we've done it twice. But, but we'll do it again this year too. So then it will be 3 times, and that's a real pattern.
It's a tradition at that point.
Yeah. So that's like our hometown, right? That's the original November in El Salvador. But yeah, we take it on the road. We did it last year before Bitcoin Atlantis in Portugal and before the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. So we're returning to Nashville, but now at Bitcoin Park, which is not where we did it last year. So it's going to be a cool venue. It's actually Grassroots Week. So Bitcoin Park is inviting meetup organizers from around the world to, get together and like network and share best practices and all that for meetups. And there's a lot of overlap with that crowd. So I believe that's on April 9th in Bitcoin Park, and the Educators on Conference is April 10th. So come to Nashville for a few days. Yeah, so sorry, that was just a long intro to my first Bitcoin. So we're doubling down. We're doing more. We're going to do more, both domestic and international. We're going to educate more students in El Salvador in the year after legal tender was removed than in the year before it was removed, right? We're going to teach more people in 2025 than we did in 2024. We're going to have more materials this year. We're going to have more meetups. We used to have, this is the rate of expansion that we're targeting. So we've had meetups since we had our first meetup in 2021, and we've had regular meetups always the last Thursday of the month since January 2022. So we're going over 3 years for that. Always in San Salvador, always in the capital, which is it's like by far the largest city in the country, and that's great. Those meetups are great. They're super well attended, and they're just always a great time. This year, we're keeping that, right? We're keeping last Thursday of the month in San Salvador. Also in San Salvador, we're having meetups every Tuesday. So we're having weekly meetups. So we went from 1 meetup a month to 5. And we are also having meetups in 4 additional cities that we just launched like just a couple of weeks ago. We launched the first one, and that's going to be a monthly thing as well. We're trying to, work with people in each local community and kind of like co-host, help them get started, maybe, and then maybe like, let them take over.
Yeah, once the ball starts rolling, let them continue.
But yeah, so we've quintupled the number of meetups in San Salvador, and we've quintupled the number of cities where we have meetups, right? So that's like, wow. That's the sort of this is all in response to like, okay, well, this seems like grassroots Bitcoin adoption is now going to be more important than ever. How will we respond to this? We're going to teach twice as many students, and we're going to have 5 times as many meetups. We're growing our staff. We're doing like, we're just doing more of everything because we realize this is an important time. This is not a time to walk away. This is a time to double down. And it's not about sunk cost fallacy. You just can't run forever, right? There is no jurisdiction where this is good. I think maybe what this proves once and for all, and coupled with Libra in Argentina and Trump coin in the US, really like just pissing off more and more people here. But politicians are not the answer. Governments are not the answer, right? Like, cool. If a government wants to help, they want to buy Bitcoin, they want to like promote it, like that's great, but it's up to us, right? Like if we want a better world, if we want a more Bitcoinized world, it's up to us. And that is more clear than ever. So this is the time to double down, not just in El Salvador, but everywhere. This is such an important time. This year, 2025, is a real crossroads for Bitcoin adoption.
I think so too.
As like the governments and the BlackRocks of the world start to get into Bitcoin, there's a real danger that we just give it to them, right? Where we just throw up our hands like, okay, you guys take over, pump the price, and it's all good, right? No, this is exactly the time to entrench grassroots adoption, to entrench grassroots education, to entrench these core values, these like cypherpunk values. In fact, on that note, we actually, again, in response to all of this, we wrote an education manifesto, Bitcoin Educators Manifesto, which we modeled after the Cypherpunk Manifesto, which is about how important independent, impartial Bitcoin education is, and it's something worth defending. Which is another important point about this crossroads, right? Like Bitcoin education, especially what we do, introductory Bitcoin education, is vulnerable, right? Like we are approached all the time by entities that have their own incentives and interests. They say, we'd love to support you, but
we need you to do this.
Yeah. And like sometimes it's fairly innocent. Sometimes it's like, well, that's a hard no. And sometimes it's like, would we do that anyway? Is that bad? But the answer is no. The answer is always no, because it's a slippery slope, right? Like you say yes to something that doesn't seem that bad, and then all of a sudden you've compromised your values. And like this is a line we must hold with introductory Bitcoin education. We cannot compromise the values. We have an opportunity to reimagine education, right? To reimagine the world. And we're not going to get there if we follow the old playbook. And the old playbook is things are funded either by extracting value from the customer or by serving the interests of money, basically. Whether it's governments or corporations, like education is broken. Like fiat education is broken. And the reason why it's broken is the funding is broken, right? It's like it's funded by government. So is it really gonna like say anything but government propaganda? I mean, it's a really fascinating practice. If you travel around the world, try to get their history book, their own history book that they teach to children, and see how they view their own history, how they talk about their own government. Like there's a lot of parallels between all of it. It's like, we had some adversity, we came through the other end, and we're the good guys, right? Like, which of course, like that's the education that they're going to make. It doesn't governments and corporations, which are the ones that fund fiat education, are not incentivized to teach people how to think. They are incentivized to teach people what to think. And that is very different. Teaching someone, and with Bitcoin education, we don't shill any products. We're product agnostic, because the students need to come to their own conclusions. That's step one in having agency over your own life, is thinking for yourself, right? And if the materials that we made were just like, included the requests of like corporations and governments, they're not requesting, hey, can you make sure that you really empower these people to think for themselves? No, that is not what they're interested in. They're not going to say it. They're not going to come out and be like, yeah, we're the bad guys here. They don't even believe it, right? Nobody, like very few people think they're actually the bad guys. In fact, there might be something like nice about that honesty, but that is the truth, right? That is, always follow the money, always follow the incentives.
Yeah. So I'm very, very happy to hear that you guys are going to stay the course, double down your efforts. Well, even more than double down. You said you're expanding quintuple for meetups and stuff like that. So that to me inspires a lot of hope. But I do have two questions, I guess. There are other educational organizations in El Salvador that have similar objectives to My First Bitcoin. Places like Cubo Plus, places like Torgos Dev, that are also like just working under this nonprofit model to educate people about Bitcoin. Have you heard if they are going to also increase their efforts? And then there was talk of the government like promoting Bitcoin education in every single school in the country. Is that still happening?
Yes. Yeah. So Bitcoin education is on track here for sure. Like that's not affected by the IMF at all. And there's a couple of different organizations and they do different things, and that diversity is good, right? It's good to have people doing different things. Some of those programs, I believe, get some government funding. I'm not 100% on that. I think it'd be great if all Bitcoin education projects were transparent with their funding sources. We're trying to lead the way with that. But I'm not 100% sure if the government is funding some of these or not. And if they are, then potentially that would be affected, because I don't know. I guess there's some uncertainty there, but that's like edge cases. That's not most of the education that's happening here. That it potentially zero, and if it is not zero, then it's small. And the government here, the Ministry of Education, so we worked with them, I want to say, I think 2023 we started. So it's probably about 2 years that we've been working with them at this point. And we try to be clear with our funding, and we have never taken a penny or a Satoshi from the government here. We have explicitly rejected it. Like, we work with them because we want to see Bitcoin education succeed, but we do it on our own terms, right? And a big part of that is that we have been very explicit that we will never accept money from them. So they actually took this Bitcoin diploma, which is open source, and they made some slight modifications. They made it their own. And now that is being taught in the school system here. We, along with Bitcoin Beach, helped train 500 public school teachers. So we taught 500 public school teachers this book, and now they're teaching, the Ministry of Education's version, which is mostly the same, to their own students. That project is basically already in the control of the Ministry of Education. We had a meeting the end of last year, so in December, where we talked about the Ministry of Education starting a Bitcoin department to like really own this, rather than like have these third parties like us come in and like fill these patches. And they everybody thought it was a good idea. I haven't heard anything otherwise. I think / hope that's still in the works. We have another project where we've worked with the Little Hodler, which is they have cartoons and plushies. It's like a Bitcoin brand, Bitcoin organization company brand. So we worked with them on creating curriculum for younger audiences,
Okay.
starting with grade 2. And we are, so grade 2 and grade 3 are complete. And we're going to have a train-in next month in April. And then that will be out in the wild. From that point, we will kind of take a step back. We're not going to help develop the curriculum for grade 4, 5, and 6, which are the next ones, for two reasons. One is it's not going to. It's pretty El Salvador specific. It's actually really great, really great. They've done a great job. It looks great, like with the little hodler design.
Characters.
Yeah, like it looks great. It's going to be a huge success, I'm sure. But our motivation for working on it was twofold. One was to help things get started, and two was that we would be able to open source the materials and share it with the network of independent Bitcoin educators around the world. And on the first point, like things are going really well. Like the snowball is picking up steam. Like they can handle it, right? Like we're not needed, right? And on the sharing it with the world part, it's more El Salvador specific than we anticipated when we started this about a year ago. So it's super cool for El Salvador, but it's not going to be that useful to,
Outside of El Salvador.
Yeah, outside of El Salvador. So it's, and that was our main motivation. Like our motivation was not money again, right? Like that was literally our condition for working on this project. Like we'll work on it, but we don't want payment in money. We just like, we're like the IMF. We just want conditions. But the condition was that it had to be open source.
Altruistic conditions.
Yeah. But yeah, it's actually really cool. So we did a lot of work with the government over the past 2 years, and that's winding down. And like it probably seems like suspicious timing, but it is not. It has nothing to do with the IMF. This was always the game plan. Like we didn't. When I came down here in 2021, I wasn't like, oh, I hope I get to work with the government. Like that. It happened, and it's really grateful that it happened. But it's a grassroots Bitcoin education project, and we're going to get back to that, right? We're going to be, we teach it basically everywhere that we can. We teach it in cafes. We do teach it in government centers, which will probably continue. We teach it, like community centers that are state-owned. We teach it in public schools and private schools. We have our own house and headquarters, which we've kind of converted into a school. And it's actually, it's going to free up capacity for us to do things like the meetups, right? That's one of the ways that as we're winding down one thing, we're putting more energy into other things. So we're putting more energy into that grassroots bottom up sort of adoption and education, which again, I think 2025 is a crucial year for that.
Yeah, I would agree. And then I guess my last question, we're over an hour now. Usually I do these interviews for like 30 minutes. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. I've been extremely curious just to hear like someone's perspective that's in El Salvador about these changes. So thank you for coming on the show to discuss it. My last question is the Bitcoin office. Like there was a lot of fanfare around the Bitcoin office. The Bitcoin office was kind of like the main mouthpiece for the government in terms of Bitcoin policy. And with the conditions of the IMF telling the government that they're not allowed to be like involved in Bitcoin in such a way anymore, is the Bitcoin office going to continue? Are they going to continue, like, I guess, assisting businesses that want to set up shop in El Salvador, like under Bitcoin policy? Like, do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about that. I presume two things to be true.
Mm,
One, the Bitcoin office will continue.
okay.
Two, there will be some changes. I don't
Yeah.
know what those changes will be. I actually don't, like, for example, the Bitcoin buy-in, I think wasn't the Bitcoin office. I think it's there was another office. What was it called? AAB. What does that stand for? But I
It's
think
the fund. I forget what it stands for, but it's the fund, like the Bitcoin management fund.
yeah, something like that. So
Yeah.
there could be a consolidation. Maybe that gets brought under the umbrella of the Bitcoin office. Maybe not. That's pure speculation. I have no idea what's going to happen. With a lot of things, I think time is going to tell us a lot. There is still, at this point, I suppose there are some in the know people that know what's going to happen. Uh, but for myself and almost everyone else, we're just trying to piece together available public information to try to determine what's happening, and like things should become clearer with time.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for that insight. Do you want to say anything else before we close out the interview? Is there any other things you want to promote, or any final statements or words you want to leave with the audience?
Yeah. So support independent, impartial Bitcoin education. You could follow My First Bitcoin on social media. It's on Twitter and Instagram and whatever other ones. It's just My First Bitcoin _. You could visit our website, which is myfirstbitcoin.io. We are independent because of you, so we rely on donations from the community. Every Bitcoin education project on a long enough timeline will be captured by whoever funds it. So we're funded by the community. We are captured by the community. We speak for the community, not for the government, not for a corporation. And I think it's become pretty clear that we are not censoring ourselves around that. And that's why, right? Because we're supported by individuals that donate. So please support, donate, volunteer, just share the materials. They're open source. They've been translated into, I think, 15 or 20 languages at this point. So, use it, teach others. We're all microeducators. And if we want a better future, if we want a different future, it's up to us to create it, right? No one is going to do that for us. That is what got us into this situation in the first place, is we've deferred our agency. We have given up our sovereignty voluntarily, mostly, to others to do it for us, to take care of it for us. And Bitcoin is an opportunity to change that, to reverse that. It's an opportunity to have agency in your own life and to define your own destiny, but only if you seize that opportunity. So Bitcoin is a tool that is only valuable when used. Agency is a tool that is only valuable when used. So we have an opportunity to really change the future course of humanity, and we need to seize it. We need to be active in that.
I agree, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I think this interview is very, very powerful, and I think it provides some much needed clarity around all the rumors and speculation as to what's happening in El Salvador. So I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show, John. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.